On the 23rd of June, 1942, eagle-eyed Royal Air Force observers stationed at Pembrey Airfield, nestled in the southern reaches of Wales, peered intently through their binoculars. Their gaze followed a streamlined German interceptor as it gracefully descended through a veil of clouds, aligning itself for touchdown. The customary wail of alert sirens was conspicuously absent. The rumble of anti-aircraft batteries, which ought to have been acquiring the encroaching enemy aircraft, remained silent. Yet, something about the pilot's approach felt distinctly amiss. The Focke-Wulf 190, a formidable machine, settled with remarkable smoothness onto the grassy airstrip and decelerated to a halt adjacent to the control tower. The engine's roar subsided. The canopy slid open, revealing Oberleutnant Armin Faber of Jägerschwader II. He extricated himself from the cockpit, removed his leather flying helmet, and surveyed the unfamiliar structures surrounding him. A chilling realization then washed over him. The aircraft arrayed on the flight line were not German Messerschmitts. They were British Spitfires. The personnel advancing towards him were clad not in the familiar grey of the Luftwaffe, but in the distinctive blue of the Royal Air Force. This dawning comprehension that gripped Faber at that very instant was mirrored simultaneously in the minds of British intelligence officers scattered across southern England. Germany's most potent fighter, the very aircraft responsible for decimating Allied aviators for months, this enigmatic new weapon that had proven virtually invincible in aerial combat, had just been delivered, intact and undamaged, to British hands by a pilot who had become utterly disoriented and mistakenly believed he was landing on French soil. The intelligence windfall was truly staggering. However, what American test pilots would subsequently uncover once they had the opportunity to thoroughly examine this remarkable aircraft would fundamentally alter the engagement tactics employed by every Allied fighter against German adversaries for the remainder of the conflict. For a period spanning 8 months, the Focke-Wulf 190 had been a persistent spectre, a terrifying presence haunting Allied pilots venturing across the English Channel. Its initial combat debut had occurred over France in September of 1941. From its very first engagement, pilots recognized they were confronting something truly exceptional. Squadron Leader J.E. Johnson of the Royal Air Force, who would ultimately achieve the distinction of becoming Britain's highest-scoring ace, encountered the FW 190 in early 1942 and narrowly escaped with his life. He would later recount in writing that it possessed superior speed to their Spitfire Mark V aircraft in level flight and in a dive. Furthermore, he noted, it could outroll us. Its armament was devastating. For the first time in the war, our fighters were comprehensively outclassed. The grim statistics of the period served to underscore the palpable fear. During the initial 6 months of 1942, Royal Air Force fighter losses over France escalated dramatically. Seasoned pilots who had weathered the trials of the Battle of Britain found themselves shot down by an adversary they were incapable of matching. The Focke-Wulf 190 possessed the capability to dive away from pursuing Spitfires, outmaneuver them in turning engagements, and dispatch them with cannons firing 20mm explosive rounds. American pilots arriving in Britain with their P-47 Thunderbolts were immediately apprised of the dire warnings. The advice was unequivocal: do not engage the 190 in turning maneuvers. Do not attempt to outroll it. Avoid engaging in dive competitions. The compendium of prohibitions was extensive, while the list of effective countermeasures was terrifyingly brief. Intelligence agencies were desperately seeking answers. What contributed to this aircraft's extraordinary efficacy? What were its inherent limitations? How could Allied fighters effectively counter it? Obtaining these crucial insights, however, necessitated the examination of an actual Focke-Wulf 190. Regrettably, every single example shot down over British territory had been too badly damaged to reveal its closely guarded secrets. Then, Armin Faber committed his catastrophic error. Before we proceed further, I would be most interested to learn from which location you are viewing this narrative and what knowledge you possess regarding the Focke-Wulf 190. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. I am curious to know if you have encountered this story previously and if you value this level of historical detail. I sincerely hope you will consider subscribing to this channel. The meticulous research required to ensure the accuracy of these historical accounts is considerable, and knowing you are engaged makes the effort profoundly worthwhile. Oberleutnant Armin Faber was far from an inexperienced aviator. At the age of 21, he had already achieved multiple aerial victories and was regarded as a highly skilled member of Jägerschwader II, the elite Richthofen fighter wing. On the 23rd of June, 1942, he was participating in a fighter sweep operation over the English Channel, providing high cover for German bombers engaged in attacks against coastal targets. The mission had proceeded without incident until the return leg. Somewhere over the Channel, during a vigorous engagement with British fighters, Faber became disoriented. The obscuring cloud cover concealed the coastline, and the position of the sun offered deceptive directional cues. When he finally broke through the clouds and observed a verdant landscape below, complete with an airfield, his mind made a simple yet disastrous assumption. He believed he was over France, gazing upon a Luftwaffe base. In reality, he was over Wales, looking down upon RAF Pembry. This mistake, in hindsight, seems almost inconceivable, but combat disorientation was a far more prevalent phenomenon than military establishments readily admitted. Pilots operating at high velocities through cloud layers, subjected to extreme g-forces that affected cerebral blood flow, frequently experienced a loss of their directional bearings. Faber had executed a 180-degree turn during the dogfight and was simply unaware of it. Upon landing and observing the Spitfires, Faber attempted to restart his engine and take off again, but Royal Air Force personnel were already converging on his aircraft. Within mere minutes, he was in custody, and British intelligence officers were meticulously examining the pristine Focke-Wulf 190A resting on their runway. The immediate reaction at Royal Air Force headquarters bordered on outright elation. Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory, commanding RAF Fighter Command, promptly issued orders for the aircraft to be transported to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough for comprehensive testing. Every single aspect of the machine was to be meticulously documented, precisely measured, and thoroughly analyzed. Within 48 hours, the Focke-Wulf 190 was at Farnborough, undergoing inspection by Britain's foremost aviation engineers. Their findings elucidated every aspect of the Allied pilots' harrowing combat experiences. The aircraft was a testament to ingenious, practical engineering. While the Spitfire exemplified elegant aerodynamic design, the Focke-Wulf 190 embodied a philosophy of robust functionality. Its BMW 801 radial engine generated an impressive 1,700 horsepower, a notable increase over the Spitfire Mark V's 1,470. However, sheer power was not the sole determinant of its superiority. The Focke-Wulf 190's most formidable advantage lay in its exceptional roll rate. The aircraft could transition from one bank to the other with a rapidity that surpassed any Allied fighter. This seemingly minor characteristic proved to be revolutionary in aerial combat. When a Spitfire attempted to mirror the Focke-Wulf 190's rolling maneuvers, the British fighter simply could not keep pace. The German pilot could abruptly reverse direction, gain advantageous angles, and position himself for firing solutions before his Allied counterpart could even react. British test pilot Captain Eric Brown, who flew the captured Focke-Wulf 190 extensively, immediately grasped the reason for the alarming casualty rates among Allied pilots. He reported that the ailerons felt light and exceptionally responsive at all speeds, allowing him to maneuver the aircraft through the sky with virtually no perceptible effort. In contrast, the Spitfire demanded considerable muscular exertion and refined technique. The Focke-Wulf 190, however, responded almost intuitively, as if guided by thought alone. The disparity in firepower was equally striking. The FW-190A variant was equipped with four 20mm MG-151 cannons and two 7.92mm machine guns. A mere 2-second burst delivered more explosive force than a Spitfire Mark V could generate in 10 seconds of sustained firing. Furthermore, the weaponry was strategically mounted within the wings, close to the fuselage, resulting in a tightly concentrated firing pattern that proved devastating at typical combat ranges. The aircraft's dive performance provided the explanation for its consistent ability to escape pursuing Spitfires. The German fighter's greater mass and cleaner aerodynamic profile enabled it to outdive anything the Royal Air Force possessed. Pilots who dared to follow an Focke-Wulf 190 into a steep dive could only watch helplessly as the German aircraft accelerated away. However, the meticulous testing also brought to light certain vulnerabilities. This is precisely where the intelligence gleaned became strategic gold for the Allied forces. The radial engine, while powerful, presented cooling challenges at higher altitudes. Above 20,000 feet, the aircraft's performance began to degrade significantly. The engine struggled to operate effectively in the thinner air, leading to pilot reports of power loss and overheating issues. In stark contrast, the Spitfire's Merlin engine, specifically engineered for high-altitude operations, actually improved in performance as the altitude increased. The substantial weight that contributed to the Focke-Wulf 190's prowess as a dive bomber also rendered it less agile in sustained turning combat. While it could outroll a Spitfire, it could not outturn one in a prolonged engagement. If an Allied pilot could successfully draw an Focke-Wulf 190 into a sustained horizontal turning battle, the advantage decisively shifted. Most critically, American engineers discovered that the Focke-Wulf 190's control surfaces became excessively heavy at high speeds. In a dive exceeding 400 miles per hour, a pilot would require considerable strength to execute a pull-out maneuver. This created a moment of critical vulnerability. If an Allied fighter could pursue an Focke-Wulf 190 through the initial dive and intercept it during the pull-out phase, when the German pilot was battling his own controls, attacks became a genuine possibility. British intelligence promptly initiated the dissemination of tactical bulletins to Royal Air Force squadrons. However, they also undertook an action that would prove instrumental in the eventual outcome of the air war. They extended an invitation to American test pilots to visit Farnborough and experience firsthand the captured Focke-Wulf 190. In August of 1942, pilots from the United States Army Air Forces arrived at Farnborough to examine Germany's formidable secret weapon. These pilots would subsequently return to their American training bases armed with knowledge that would undoubtedly save hundreds of American lives. Major Cass Hoff, among the initial contingent of American aviators to pilot the captured Focke-Wulf 190, submitted a detailed report that was circulated to every fighter group preparing for deployment to Europe. His assessment was forthright and tactically astute. He stated that the Focke-Wulf 190 would outperform any Allied fighter below 20,000 feet if the German pilot possessed a competent understanding of its capabilities. Hoff wrote, "Our advantage lies in altitude. Above 25,000 feet, our P-47s and later model Spitfires hold the edge. We must force them to higher altitudes, and we will prevail. If we allow them to dictate combat at low altitudes, we will perish." This singular piece of intelligence fundamentally reshaped American fighter tactics in Europe. When P-47 Thunderbolt units commenced operations in 1943, their operational doctrine emphasized high-altitude engagements. Bomber escorts maintained maximum altitude, and fighter sweeps operated above 25,000 feet whenever feasible. When German fighters attempted to engage, American pilots would climb, compelling the Focke-Wulf 190 to follow into the thinner atmosphere where its engine struggled. The captured Focke-Wulf 190 also influenced the development of American aircraft. Engineers at Wright Field meticulously studied its superior roll rate and initiated modifications to the ailerons of the P-47 and P-51 aircraft to enhance their responsiveness. The arrangement of its weaponry informed American thinking regarding the concentration of firepower. Even the cockpit configuration, which German designers had optimized for combat efficiency, served as an inspiration for American fighter designs. However, perhaps the most significant lesson derived was the realization that the Focke-Wulf 190 was not an invincible entity. It was an exceptional aircraft, possessing distinct advantages alongside exploitable weaknesses. Allied pilots, who had been psychologically intimidated by the 190's formidable reputation, now possessed concrete information regarding how to confront it and emerge victorious. By the conclusion of 1943, the tactical landscape had undergone a dramatic transformation. American P-47s and P-51s were engaging Focke-Wulf 190s at high altitudes, where Allied fighters held a clear advantage. The Royal Air Force's Spitfire Mark IX, equipped with upgraded Merlin engines, could match the Focke-Wulf 190's performance across most altitude brackets. Pilots on both sides understood that they were operating distinct aircraft, each optimized for different operational envelopes. The attrition rates began to shift in favor of the Allies. German losses escalated as American and British pilots effectively capitalized on the intelligence gleaned from Faber's captured aircraft. German pilots observed that Allied fighters were no longer committing the tactical errors that had initially contributed to the Focke-Wulf 190's dominance. Oberleutnant Joseph Priller, a high-scoring Focke-Wulf 190 ace, commented in late 1943 that American pilots had evidently studied the aircraft thoroughly. He noted in his combat journal that they understood the necessity of avoiding rolling scissors maneuvers and that they intentionally pursued engagements at higher altitudes where the German engines labored. He concluded that they had learned their lessons. The captured Focke-Wulf 190 remained at Farnborough throughout the duration of the war, serving as a vital reference for the evaluation of new German variants as they emerged. When the Focke-Wulf 190D-9, known as the Dora, equipped with an inline engine, appeared in late 1944, Allied intelligence immediately conducted comparisons with Faber's captured aircraft, thereby gaining insight into how German designers had addressed the original model's high-altitude performance limitations. Post-war, aviation historians have quantified the profound impact of Faber's navigational error. The intelligence acquired through the examination of the intact Focke-Wulf 190 was disseminated to thousands of Allied pilots through tactical bulletins, training films, and direct demonstration flights. This newfound knowledge influenced aircraft development, tactical doctrine, and operational planning across multiple air forces. Captain Eric Brown, who had the distinction of flying more captured enemy aircraft than any other Allied pilot, would later remark, "Faber's navigational error provided us with the Rosetta Stone for understanding German fighter design." Every tactical advantage it possessed was meticulously documented, and every weakness was ruthlessly exploited. That single aircraft probably saved more Allied lives than any other intelligence coup of the war. The irony was not lost on German intelligence when the full story came to light. One Luftwaffe officer commented, "We spent months attempting to capture an intact Spitfire Mark IX so that we could study its enhancements. The British did not have to attempt anything. We delivered our most advanced fighter directly to them." Armand Faber spent the remainder of the war interned in a prisoner-of-war camp in Canada. He survived the conflict and eventually returned to Germany, where he lived until 1976. Luftwaffe records indicate that he was initially held accountable for the loss of the aircraft. However, later assessments acknowledged that combat disorientation could affect any pilot. The more pertinent question remained why German intelligence had assumed the British would never succeed in acquiring an intact Focke-Wulf 190. The narrative of Faber's captured fighter imparts a critical lesson regarding the nature of technological superiority in warfare. Germany's Focke-Wulf 190 represented a significant leap forward in fighter design upon its introduction in 1941. For nearly a year, it dominated Allied aircraft through its superior performance and innovative engineering. However, that advantage dissipated the moment Allied engineers were able to meticulously examine the actual machine. No aircraft is inherently invincible. Every design involves inherent compromises and trade-offs. The Focke-Wulf 190's dominance at low altitudes was achieved at the expense of its high-altitude performance. Its exceptional roll rate was coupled with heavy control forces at high speeds. Its potent armament added weight, which consequently reduced its maneuverability. Once Allied pilots fully comprehended these trade-offs, they were able to exploit them effectively. Today, the Focke-Wulf 190 is remembered as one of the most significant fighter designs of the Second World War. Aviation museums proudly display surviving examples as testaments to German engineering prowess. Yet, the aircraft's formidable reputation is inextricably linked to the intelligence coup that ultimately unveiled its secrets. In the intricate calculation of wartime advantage, a single pilot's momentary disorientation over the English Channel transformed Germany's secret weapon into an open book. The Focke-Wulf 190 that Armin Faber inadvertently delivered to Britain became the very aircraft that taught the Allies how to achieve victory. This lesson resonates throughout military history. Superior technology is undoubtedly important. Superior intelligence, however, is even more so. And occasionally, the most profound victories stem not from devastating offensives, but from simple errors that inadvertently provide your adversary with precisely what they have been desperately seeking. The Focke-Wulf 190 could have endured as an enigma, an invincible adversary that continued to decimate Allied pilots through a combination of psychological intimidation and technical superiority. Instead, it evolved into an invaluable teaching instrument, studied, learned from, and ultimately defeated by every Allied pilot. A solitary navigational miscalculation, a single landed aircraft, a monumental intelligence windfall that irrevocably altered the course of the air war over Europe. This is how America acquired Germany's clandestine fighter. And this is how one singular mistake fundamentally shifted the balance of power in the skies.